Picking back up where we left off last time, we've done a little bit of exploration on solving some of the oil drain tube and oil filter issues, some of the exhaust issues, and we are going to try to put it back together today, try to get the entire engine in the car, and get it ready to start up. The time gap between kind of refreshing the engine and actually putting the car back together was for a couple different reasons. First, the initial part of the gap was to figure out some of the parts, the pushrod tubes, the oil pump, things like that. The second part, though, was finishing my master's degree. And really, as soon as I finished that, we jumped right back on putting the car together, and here we are. On the intake manifold, we have heat risers that come up off of the exhaust, and being as old as this piece is, it was completely clogged with carbon. So I've been working on unclogging it, and I've done that successfully, finally. The next thing I have to do is patch this thin area before we paint it, and that's what we're going to do right now. Steel stick from JB Weld. And it just needs to be mixed thoroughly until you can tell it's one solid color. And we will press it into the hole and just smooth it out as best as we can. Whoops, I was supposed to wear gloves. Sets in 3 to 5 minutes and hardens after 60. So one of the things that we're changing today is the oil pump and the oil filter location. When I test fit the new exhaust, it turned out that the existing location from this adapter didn't work with this exhaust. And we knew that was a possibility, so that's okay. We will actually reinstall a different oil pump with a different system. It's going to relocate where the filter goes into the fender well. So we've made some AN lines, going to actually change the location and give us plenty of room to mount the exhaust and mount the filter. Another thing I wanted to change was the fuel pump mount, but as old as these are, they usually come out broken. So what I'm going to do is make a pressing system where I threaded the existing piece and used a bolt and a socket to pull it out. First thing we'll probably do is go ahead and install the new oil drain tubes. The last set that we had still were not the correct length for this engine, so it actually became pretty difficult to find the right ones. So what we did is ordered some spring-loaded ones that should still adjust with the temperature of the engine expanding, contracting. A lot of people have had good luck with them, and we'll see how those go. Because these are spring-loaded, you can install them with the heads bolted on, and I did that on the 3 and 4 side. But because it's out of the engine still, and it's much easier, I just unbolted the head, and we're going to install these and just torque it back down. Here's another point of contention. Do you use a sealer on the tubes or not? A lot of people say they've never used it and are fine. People say they always use it and are fine. So I'm just putting a very light coat, and we will see what happens. So I needed some counter force on the opposite side to be able to push the head in just enough to get the nuts started to start compressing the oil tubes. And now that I've got just a little bit of thread, we can use the studs themselves to pull the head in. The most frustrating part of this particular project was probably just the many different parts that are available, and learning along the way exactly which ones you need for your particular year, and then learning that maybe what you think you have for your year was really changed by somebody else a couple decades ago, and what you thought you were getting was correct was not, and having to then learn where this different part may have come from and what you need to do to solve it and to address it. Aside from that being frustrating, it's also an opportunity to learn a lot more about all of the changes over the decades. Okay, we've just gotten the oil pump in, and now we can do the cover, and then we'll put the front tin on and the front pulley. And I think then we can put the rest of the top tin on, and then I think we can set it under the car and start thinking about mounting it. Of course, we're going to prime the engine with actual oil before we ever start it. This will just give us a little bit extra on initial turnover. So we've given this enough time to cure, and we're going to go ahead and put the first coat of paint on it. Cleaned up pretty well, but we're going to go ahead and make it look good. I'm going to go ahead and install the rear section of the exhaust. It'll be a little bit easier to do out here, plus it'll let us know if the tin that fits on top is fitting correctly against the exhaust flanges out here in the back. Something else I've done since the first video is I've wrapped it in this DEI wrap, because we'll have the oil lines running right over here. And I thought it probably would be a good idea just to go ahead and wrap all the exhaust to maybe try to keep a little bit of that heat away from the lines. Because this side doesn't. Right now, I'm going to make sure all of the remaining oil is drained out. We've got a couple replacement pieces that we're going to put in for that. And while that's finishing draining, we'll start to build it. There really shouldn't be hardly any engine in it or any oil in it. This is the first piece to go on of the updated oil cooler system. And it's going to sit right here. And what that's going to do is going to move the oil cooler itself out of the path of the airflow to the cylinders. Now, because this is an older case, it's very important that we choose the correct bushings, because there's actually a smaller diameter in this old case than there is in the new cooler. So we have expanding bushings here. If we don't use the right ones, then they'll just leak and leak everywhere. So the new shroud needs some threaded inserts so that we can mount the coil. So I'm drilling it out now, and we're going to use these and this to mount it. This is my documentation from the Volkswagen Museum in Germany. It tells us the original specs of this car, its build date, January 27th of '65. The original color was actually Fontana Gray, which I'll show you a few spots on the car where you can still see it. And the original 1.2 liter, the original upholstery, some of the original specs on this page, including the original rated horsepower. I thought it was cool because of my German last name on the German documentation too. My favorite color has always been red. So being attracted to this car and then finding out that potentially its original color was the Fontana Gray and not ruby red. I wouldn't say it was disappointing, but as a car enthusiast, it takes you in a couple different directions. It's a bit of a struggle. Do you want the original color or do you want your favorite color? It is possible, and I've heard this from a couple different sources, that the original color listed on the museum certificate might not necessarily be correct. Of course, you would assume that it is coming from the original source, but being able to see a couple spots on the car that look like the Fontana Gray kind of really makes you wonder, do you want to go back to the original color? Do you want to keep it the red that you wanted? So that's a question that we'll have to consider. One thing we need to do is make sure that we've got all of the old gas out. It's been sitting here for a long time, and there really isn't a whole lot left in it. We drained a lot of it early on, but we're going to try to get the last of it out and put some fresh fuel in. Oh, we can say too, that's one of the things that were originally German, is the amber-colored taillights in addition to the red. I think the imported US cars were all red. This Beetle was originally a German domestic car. It could have been imported here by a serviceman. I've heard that happen often. An individual I work with knew several people that would do that. Originally, and up until last year, it had the 1200cc engine, which originally is listed as putting out 34 horsepower. Based on the condition of the piston rings that I saw and a few other things, I'm sure it wasn't putting out nearly that much. Hopefully now with this refresh and with this upgrade to 1385cc, we'll be putting out that, or maybe a few horsepower more. It certainly feels like it. We pulled a siphon on the fuel, and we're just going to let it drain into here until we've got everything we can. Now we have to swap out the original fan with the larger fan. This is the last piece of the new cooling system, and if you look here, this fan is wider than the original. This will move more air through the newer doghouse shroud. This is where we have to watch some of the spacing. And all of these shims are on the back side of the old fan. So we're going to try to put a couple of them in there and see if we get the right clearance. It's gonna bolt in right there. Seems to be about right. We'll know for sure once we get everything tightened down, but I think it feels pretty good right there. From what I can tell, of course I can't know for sure, but this might be the original distributor that's lasted all these years. At least it's the same part number that was originally with this year and this engine. So we're going to reuse it, and it was working fine on the previous setup. So hopefully it will be okay. I had to take a few things back off to be able to get the fan in the shroud. It had been a while, obviously, since I put one of these back in, and there just wasn't enough clearance between the alternator stand and the shroud to get the fan in there. So all I had to do was just loosen the shroud back up and just lift it up just enough to get the fan in there and the stand back in. So just a few minutes setback, not a big deal. So far today, we have gotten the alternator stand, the alternator, the fan in the shroud, the fuel pump installed, the distributor installed, the coil installed. We've drained all the fuel in preparation to put new fuel in. And we are about to route the new fuel line, and we'll put the carburetor on. We'll go ahead and add fuel and oil to the engine and get ready to start it. So what we're doing here is replacing the fuel line. We've got to get it right here. We've already clamped it back here on the hard line, and we are going to put a fuel filter in line up here, not in the engine bay. It should only take a second. Another thing that this vehicle needs, that I would like to do, is replace the entire fuel line. It looks like at some point in time, there's just some generic fuel line in here that's just been bent all over the place. And as far as I know, the original fuel line, it runs down the tunnel of this car, and it's probably never been changed. So you have to wonder about the integrity of the existing line. Leaking out in. The pictures I took of exactly where these wires were run. It's always a good idea, especially if it's going to end up being a long time before you can revisit these things. Because there are a couple of these I would not remember probably where they went. So it turns out I don't have a filter that fits properly with this new fan shroud. So what we're going to do for today is use the stock piece. We're going to rotate it incorrectly. One of the original features on this car was the locking steering column. And although the lock itself still works, when I first purchased the car, the ignition did not. So the previous owner had a push button start, and that worked fine. But I wanted to try something different. So I actually was able to get the ignition to work, but the problem is it's completely stripped out. So anything at all could start it. So what I've put together here, this new ignition came with the new door handles I put in a long time ago, and they're actually keyed together. So I can actually have just the one key. And I've made a little panel here that will go right here. And the reason I did that, I still wanted to have the functionality of the lock, plus it just kind of looks cool. And I did not want to drill a new hole through here, which is where they normally go. So for now, at least, I'm just going to put it right here. But you really come to appreciate, again, all of the changes that were made over the decades and how similar things are and how slightly different, but completely different things can be. So we are just about ready to turn the engine over to get some oil flowing. We have the spark plugs out. The oil filter is out to see when we have some oil flowing out. Once we have oil, we'll put the filter on, we'll put the plugs in, and try to start. Okay. Well, we've got the oil system flowing. We went ahead and put the oil filter on. Put the plugs in, we put the wires in. And so now, we're going to put the wheels on, we're going to let it down, we're going to roll it outside, and crank it over a few times and see if it'll start. Probably unlikely to start at first. Okay. Here we go. I need to jump it. So the Beetle battery right now apparently isn't enough to turn it over well enough. So we're going to get some help from our Optima Red. the car first started, there are a lot of things running through your mind. You are excited, of course, but there are many other things that you're thinking about and looking for at the same time. And that comes, I think, probably just with time and with experience. You don't want to miss something because you're too excited in the moment. You're thinking about fuel leaks, oil leaks, you're listening for noises. You're thinking about how high it's idling. Do I need to idle it higher for the break-in procedure?
Something, if you might notice on the car, the front wheels are flush with the body. One of the reasons that they're pushed out a little bit more is because of the disc brake kit that's on the car. Some people pull the wheels in with a narrowed beam. I like them where they are. Something that I would like to do now with the rear is get a deeper lipped rim to bring those a little bit flush with the body as well. Just a second ago, two things really. We were looking at holding the RPMs of a 2000 to help break the new pistons and rings in, get them really seated well. And the other thing, we were looking at the timing, and we rotated the distributor to give us the correct timing for this engine. And fortunately, it looks like the settings that we had on the carburetor already were pretty good to go, so I think we're okay to let it break in for now.
Smoothly. We haven't found any leaks. We're going to change the oil. We're going to wash the car, and we will start driving it around. It really has been a fun car to work on. There's plenty of room. Everything comes apart easily. Everything goes back together pretty easily. It was obviously designed very well. The car itself being in production in one country or another up until the mid-2000s. So it's been around for a long time, and I'm learning why.